$500,000 American sitting on a velvet table in a back room in Macau on a Tuesday night in January 1969. A man named Yuri Volkov had been promising for 14 months that no living human could last 5 seconds in front of him. He had proved it 41 times, 41 men, 41 beatings. Not a single one had walked out on his own legs. The shortest fight had lasted 1.5 seconds, the longest 4.8. Yuri Volkov stood 72 in tall. He weighed 391 lb, and the people who whispered about him in Hong Kong, in Manila, in Bangkok, did not call him a fighter. They called him the Russian, or sometimes more quietly the executioner. Because before he came to the Far East to make money breaking bones for sport, Yuri Volkov had spent 11 years in a wing of the KGB that does not appear in any history book. He was the kind of man you sent to kill another man with bare hands when bullets would leave too much paperwork. He had 36 confirmed kills on the official record. Nobody knew how many unsanctioned. On the night of January 14, 1969, at 11 minutes past 9 in the evening, a small man in a dark blue jacket walked into that back room in Macau and asked for a chair. He was 57. He weighed 138 lb. He was smiling. His name was Bruce Lee, and in the next 90 seconds, the floor of that back room was going to change history. But Bruce Lee did not yet know what he had walked into. He thought he was meeting a businessman. He was wrong. The Lisboa was not yet the famous casino it would later become. In January of 1969, it was only 9 months old, a tall white block of a building on the Avenida de Amizade, smelling of fresh paint and stale cigar smoke, and the perfume the cuppier wore to cover the diesel from the harbor. Macau was still Portuguese in those days. The street signs were in 2 languages. The police wore cream-colored uniforms. Nobody asked questions about the rooms above the main casino floor where the real money moved. The back room sat on the 2nd floor in the southwest corner, behind a door marked only with the number 18. The number 18 in Cantonese sounds like the words for certain prosperity. Someone had thought that was funny. Inside, the room was 42 feet long and 28 ft wide, lit by 3 brass chandeliers and 1 floor lamp in the corner that always seemed to flicker. The floor was teak. The walls were paneled in dark wood up to the height of a man's shoulder, then plastered above that in the color of weak tea. There was no window. There was a green felt table in the center, 2 leather couches against the east wall, and a small bar against the west wall where a Filipino man named Domingo Reyes had been pouring drinks for the same private clientele for 19 years. Domingo was 61 years old. He had 3 grown daughters in Manila. He had seen in those 19 years men shot at this bar and men knifed at this bar, and at least 1 man who walked in healthy at midnight and was carried out at 3:00 in the morning under a tablecloth. He had stopped flinching at any of it. But on the night of January 14, 1969, Domingo Reyes was about to see something he would talk about very quietly for the rest of his life. Air smelled of cigar smoke and orange peel, and the faint metallic smell that polished brass makes when a chandelier has hung over the bodies of nervous men. Somewhere down the hallway, a record player was scratching out a Frank Sinatra song. Nobody in the back room was listening. None of the 11 men in that room knew what was about to happen. To understand what happened that night, you must first understand Yuri Volkov, because the man who waited in the Lisboa back room was not simply large. He was a different category of human being. He stood 7 ft and 2 in his stocking feet. His official weight taken on a freight scale in Hong Kong 3 weeks earlier was 391 lb. He had been measured by a Portuguese physician named Dr. Antonio Brando, who had examined Soviet defectors for the colonial government for many years. Brando wrote in his report that Volkov's chest measured 58 in at full inhalation. His neck was 23.12 in around, which is wider than the waist of most 10-year-old boys. His hands were beyond unusual. From the base of the wrist to the tip of the middle finger, they measured 10 3/4 in. He could hold a regulation American basketball flat against his palm with 3 fingers, let go, and walk across the room, and the ball would not fall. His forearms were the size of a normal man's calf. There was something biologically wrong about him, the doctor wrote in the margin of his report in pencil, as if afraid to commit it to ink. The man's heart, when listened to with a stethoscope, beat at 42 times per minute. That is the resting heart rate of an Olympic distance runner. But Yuri Volkov did not run. He simply walked slowly and the floor moved under him. He did not lumber, he glided. Weight that should be clumsy made graceful by the certainty that nothing in the world will get in its way. His record was simple: 41 challenges in 14 months, across 6 cities: Manila, Bangkok, Singapore, Saigon, Taipei, Macau. 41 men, 41 beatings. Not one fight had reached the 5-second mark. The average duration of a Volkov match was 2.7 seconds. One man, a German wrestler named Klaus Heinemann, who had competed in the Munich circuit, lasted 4.8 seconds. He survived because he had the sense to fall down on purpose at 3 seconds, hoping Volkov would stop. Vyulov did not stop. He picked Klaus Heinemann up by the back of the neck like a man lifting a kitten, held him at arm's length for a moment so the gentleman in the front row could see his face, and then drove the side of his other hand into Heinemann's collarbone with a sound that the bartender, Domingo Reyes, later described as the sound of a green tree branch snapping in half on a quiet day. Klaus Heinemann never wrestled again. He was 34 years old. He had a wife in Hamburg. The collarbone healed wrong because Vyulov had not just broken it, he had broken the joint that connects the collarbone to the shoulder blade. And Klaus Heinemann spent the next 40 years of his life unable to lift his right arm above his chest. The demonstration on the night of January 14th came at 8 before Bruce Lee arrived. There was a Mongolian wrestler in Macau, a man of perhaps 320 pounds named Bata, who had heard the rumor of the prize money. Bata was 30 years old. He had won the national championship of the Mongolian People's Republic 3 times. He believed, as wrestlers tend to believe, that no man could be brought down by a man who could not first establish a grip. So when Yuri Volkov walked into the center of the room and gestured Bata forward without speaking, Bata dropped immediately into the low stance that had won him 3 championships. He stayed low. He held his hands out wide, palms forward, ready to slap away any grab attempt. He was doing everything correctly. Yuri Volkov closed the distance between them in one stride. He covered 9 ft of room in less than half a second, and he did not grab bar at all. He hit him once with the back of his right hand. The back, not the palm, not the fist, the back of the hand, the way a man swats a fly. Bata went sideways into the wood paneling of the south wall, and his shoulder broke the panel, and he slid down into a sitting position with his head against the wall and his eyes open, but not seeing anything. He did not move for 40 minutes. A doctor from the casino worked on him for nearly an hour. The room that whole time was silent. Volkov sat down on the leather couch against the east wall and lit a thin black cigarette and did not look at the unconscious man. He looked at his own right hand. He turned it over and examined the back of it as if checking a tool for damage. There was none. He smiled at nobody in particular. When Bita was carried out on a stretcher held by 2 of the casino men, Yuri Volkov said in heavily accented English to no one in particular, "Is finished. We wait." It was the only thing he said all evening. He did not boast. He did not flex. He did not threaten. He sat. He smoked. He waited. And his stillness was so complete that 2 of the gamblers in the room, men who had handled more money in 1 week than most people earn in a lifetime, found themselves unable to look him in the face. They watched the floor. They watched the wall. They watched their own drinks. They did not watch him. He had been forged somewhere in Russia, in a place that does not appear on any map, into something that did not feel like a person anymore. He felt like a piece of weather. Most of the men in that room were praying silently that nobody else would step forward. They had paid to see violence. They had seen it, and it had been enough. But what those 11 men did not know was that someone else had already paid the price of admission and was at that moment walking 11 blocks through the Macau night with a leather camera case in his student's hand and a calculation already running in his head. How Bruce Lee came to that room is a story with a witness, and the witness was Dan Inosanto. Dan was 28 years old in January of 1969. He was Bruce's senior student. He had a wife and a young child in California, and he had flown into Macau 3 days before because Bruce had asked him to. Bruce had told Dan he was meeting a Hong Kong film producer named Lo Wei about a possible motion picture. The truth, as Dan would later realize, was more complicated. Bruce had heard about Yuri Volkov from a Wing Chun teacher in Kowloon named Sefu Wang Shun Liang. Sefu Wang had trained Bruce as a teenager. The 2 men still spoke by long-distance telephone every few weeks. On the evening of January 11th, 3 days before Bruce flew in, Sefu Wang had called Bruce in Los Angeles and said only one sentence: "There is a Russian in Macau. He is killing people for sport." The Portuguese police pretend they do not see. Bruce had listened. Bruce had said nothing for a long while. Then he had asked one question: how does he move? Sefyu Wang said he did not know how the Russian moved. He had not seen the Russian fight, but he had seen the bodies. Bruce asked one more question: where does he stand still? That question Sefyu Wang did not understand, and he asked Bruce to repeat it. Bruce repeated it. When he is not fighting, where does his weight rest? On the heels or on the balls of the feet? Sefyu Wang said he would ask. 2 days later, Sefyu Wang called back and said he had spoken to a man who had seen Vyulov sit through an entire night at the Lisboa. And the man had said that Vyulov sat with both feet flat on the floor and never crossed his legs and never shifted his weight, not once for 6 hours. Bruce listened. Then Bruce said, then his back is stiff. A man whose back is that stiff cannot turn his head in less than half a second. I will come. Dan Inosanto was told none of this. Dan was told he was flying to Macau to meet a producer and be present for a discussion. They arrived at the Lisboa at 20 minutes 8 on the night of January 14th. Dan was carrying a leather camera case that contained no camera. Contained a small medical kit, 2 cotton bandages, a glass vial of smelling salts, and a folded note in Cantonese in Bruce's handwriting that read, "If I am unconscious, do not let them touch me. Carry me to the Jesuit hospital. The doctor's name is Father Lorno." Bruce had given Dan that case in the hotel room 90 minutes earlier and had said very simply, just in case. It was at that moment that Dan Inosanto understood they were not in Macau to meet a film producer. The walk from the hotel to the casino took 11 minutes. Bruce walked in silence. He wore a navy blue mandarin collar jacket, black trousers, soft-soled shoes with a thin leather upper. He carried nothing. His hands swung loose at his sides. Dan noticed walking just behind him that Bruce's hands were not quite closed. The fingers were curled, but lightly the way a man's hands curl when he is asleep on his back. The walk to the second-floor back room felt to Dan in his later telling like walking up the steps of a courthouse on the morning of a verdict. The hallway smelled of cigar smoke and floor wax. The door numbered 18 was opened by a Macanese doorman in a black jacket who did not ask their names. He had been told to expect them. Inside, Dan saw the room. He saw the green felt table. He saw the chandeliers. He saw Domingo Reyes behind the bar. He saw the broken wood panel on the south wall where Batter's shoulder had gone through it not 2 hours earlier. And he saw sitting on the leather couch against the east wall, Yuri Volkov. Dan would later describe the moment as the moment his stomach went cold. The Russian was bigger than any human being Dan had ever seen with his own eyes. His head sat directly on his shoulders. His knees, when he was seated, came up nearly to the level of his elbows because the couch was simply not built for a person of his proportions. He was wearing a white shirt buttoned to the neck and a black suit jacket that did not fit him because no off-thorax suit jacket could fit him. And his shoulders strained the seams to the point where Dan could see, even from across the room, that one stitch on the left shoulder had already broken open. The Russian looked at Bruce. He did not stand. He did not move his head. His eyes moved, that was all, and the eyes were very pale, very cold, and very far back in his skull. Dan thought in his exact words later, "Those are not the eyes of a man, those are the eyes of a deep-sea fish." Bruce walked the length of the room calmly. He stopped about 6 ft from the leather couch. He bowed very slightly. He said, "Good evening." Volkov said nothing. There was a man in a tan suit standing near the bar, a Portuguese businessman named Sena Diego Carvalho who was acting as the agent for the matches. Carvalho was 46 years old and he was sweating in spite of the cool air, and he came forward with a clipboard in his hands and said in English, "Your name, please." Bruce said, "Bruce Lee." Carvalho wrote it down. "Your weight, please." Bruce said 138 lb. Carvalho stopped writing. He looked up. He looked at Bruce. He looked at Volkov. He looked back at Bruce. "Sir," he said, "the lightest challenger we have ever accepted weighed 210 lb. He lasted 1.9 seconds. I cannot in good conscience permit this." Bruce smiled at him, not a wide smile, a small one, the smile of a man who has been told something amusing by a child. "Sena Carvalho," he said, "I am not here to be permitted. I am here to be paid. 500,000 American dollars if I last 5 seconds. "Yes," Carvalho nodded. "Then write down my weight and let us begin." Carvalho hesitated. Bruce was perfectly still while Carvalho hesitated. His heart rate had not increased. His breathing had not changed. Dan Inosanto, standing 5 ft behind Bruce, was breathing in short, shallow breaths, the way a man breathes who has just realized he is going to watch someone he loves get killed. But Bruce stood the way a man stands when he is waiting for a bus. Carvalho wrote down the weight. Dan stepped forward and grabbed Bruce's elbow. He whispered in Cantonese, "Bruce, look at him, look at his hands. He killed a Mongolian wrestler with the back of his hand 2 hours ago. The back. Bruce, please." Bruce did not look at Dan. He kept his eyes on Vyulov, who was now slowly getting to his feet, and the leather couch creaked under him as he rose. "Dan," Bruce said quietly in English so that Vyulov could hear if he chose to, "he is too tall. A man this tall cannot bend his knees fast. His center of gravity is at the height of my eyes. I can find his balance point in less than 1 second." Volkov heard him. Volkov's eyes shifted to Bruce. Something in those eyes changed. Not fear. Yuri Volkov had not felt fear in many years. Curiosity. He was curious about this small man who spoke without bravado about finding his balance point. Curiosity in a man like Vyulov was a dangerous and unfamiliar thing. He stood up to his full 72 in. He removed his jacket. The white shirt underneath was tight across his back. Dan saw the muscles move under the shirt and thought of a horse he had once seen pull a plow through stony ground in the Philippines. Vyulov walked to the center of the room. The green felt table was quickly cleared to one side. He waited. Bruce walked to the center of the room and stopped 4 feet from Vyulov. They were not the same species. Standing 4 feet apart, Vyulov was an entire upper body taller than Bruce. Bruce's eye level was at the bottom of the Russian sternum. Dan thought of 2 cars in a parking lot, a Cadillac next to a Vespa. He thought he was going to be sick. Vyulov spoke. It was the second time he had spoken all night. In his slow, heavy English, he said, "Chinese boy, why you here? You want die for friends watching?" "Yes." Bruce smiled again, the same small smile. He said, "No, I am here because you have been hurting people who do not deserve it, and nobody else has come to ask you to stop." Vyulov made a small sound in the back of his throat, the closest he ever came to a laugh. "I stop," he said. "When you stop breathing, maybe 2 seconds." He held up 2 fingers. Each finger was thicker than Bruce's thumb. Sina Carvalho stepped forward with the rules. 5 seconds, stay on your feet, stay conscious, no leaving the marked area. He gestured to the chalk lines on the teak floor, a rough square about 12 ft on each side. He looked at Domingo Reyes, who was standing behind the bar, holding a stopwatch with shaking hands. Domingo Reyes was 61 years old, and he had been pouring drinks at that bar for 19 years, and his hands had never shaken before. They were shaking now. Carvalho said, "On my count." 3-2. Dan Inosanto reached into the leather camera case, and his hand closed around the glass vial of smelling salts. He told himself he was going to need them in less than 5 seconds. He told himself Bruce Lee was about to be hurt very badly. He told himself even as he thought it that he did not believe it, because Bruce Lee was standing perfectly still, breathing slowly, smiling slightly, and his heart rate had not changed. "1," said Carvalho. Yuri Vyulov launched himself forward. What happened in the next 4 seconds is what Bruce Lee will be remembered for among the men who saw it. Vyulov did not lunge. Vyulov did not charge. Vyulov stepped forward with one enormous stride, his right hand coming up in a flat backhand motion, the same motion he had used to put Bítera through the wall. The hand was the size and weight of a small encyclopedia. It came at Bruce's head at an angle from above, because Vyulov was 1.5 feet taller, and his strike came down at Bruce, not across. Inside Bruce Lee's mind, in the fraction of a second before that hand reached him, a calculation was running that no other human being in that room could have performed. He saw the Russian's right shoulder rotate. He saw the elbow bend at 140 degrees. He saw from the angle of the shoulder rotation that the hand would arrive at the location of his head in approximately 3/10 of a second. He saw that the Russian's left side was completely undefended because the man was so confident he had not bothered to raise his left arm. He saw that the Russian's right knee was locked, fully extended, taking the weight of 391 lb, and a locked knee cannot turn quickly. He saw 11 points on Yuri Vyulov's body that would, if touched correctly, cause immediate failure of one major bodily system. He saw the carotid artery where it crossed the jawline. He saw the brachial nerve in the inner elbow. He saw the cluster of nerves at the base of the sternum where the heart sits just behind the bone. He saw the spot below the ear where the vagus nerve runs close enough to the skin to be reached by a fingertip. He saw the inside of the thigh where the femoral artery turns away from the bone. He chose the carotid. Bruce Lee made a calculation that defined the next 4 seconds. Second 1. Bruce stepped not back, not sideways, but forward and slightly to his right. He moved 11 in. 11 in was all. He passed under Vulov's descending right hand the way a child passes under a doorway. The hand closed on empty air over the spot where Bruce's head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The wind from the swing moved Bruce's hair. He felt the breeze on his scalp. He was already past it. Second, 2. Bruce was now directly underneath Volkov's right arm, against the right side of his body. The Russian's enormous chest was an inch from Bruce's left shoulder. Bruce's right hand was already moving, not as a punch, as a touch. 2 fingers, the index and the middle finger of his right hand, came up and pressed for exactly half a second against a spot on the right side of Volkov's neck, just below the corner of the jaw, where the carotid sinus lies near the surface of the skin. The carotid sinus is a small bundle of pressure receptors that tell the brain how much blood pressure the body is experiencing. If you press it firmly, the body believes its blood pressure is dangerously high. The body responds by dropping the blood pressure immediately. The brain, deprived of pressure, begins to lose consciousness. Bruce did not press hard. He did not need to. He pressed precisely. He pressed for half a second. Then his fingers lifted away. Second, 3. Yuri Volkov continued his forward motion for another half step because his body had not yet realized what had happened to it. His right arm completed its swing through empty space. He turned slowly to look for the small man who had been in front of him a moment ago. As he turned, his eyes lost focus. His head, which had been level, began to tip very slightly to the right, the way a man's head tips when he is falling asleep at a dinner table. His mouth opened. He made no sound. His right knee, locked under the weight of his enormous frame, began to soften. His left hand reached slowly automatically for the edge of the green felt table to steady himself. He missed the table by 6 in. Second, 4. Yuri Volkov went to his knees, not in a crash. Slowly he sank like a building being lowered onto its foundation by careful machinery. First his right knee touched the teak floor, then his left. The wood groaned under him. His arms stayed at his sides. His head dropped forward until his chin rested on his own collarbone. He did not lose consciousness completely. He stayed in that kneeling posture, eyes open but unfocused, breathing slowly like a man at prayer. Bruce Lee was already 3 steps away. He had walked calmly to the edge of the chalk square, and he had stopped there, and he had turned to face Sior Carvalho, and he had folded his hands in front of him. His heart rate had not increased. His breathing had not changed. The room held its breath for a full 3 seconds. Yuri Volkov was on his knees. Bruce Lee was standing. The stopwatch in Domingo Reyes' hand had stopped at 4.1 seconds. Carvalho was holding his clipboard and his clipboard was shaking. Dan Inosanto's mouth was open. He had not breathed in those 4 seconds. He did not know it yet. The first sound was Domingo Reyes dropping the stopwatch onto the polished wood of the bar. It made a small click. Then a gambler in the corner, a heavy-set Chinese man named Chang Ming, who had bet $30,000 against Bruce, slowly began to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has just understood that he saw something impossible and is grateful for the first time in his life to have lost money. The laugh spread. Carvalho began to laugh. A Portuguese police inspector named Captain Manuel Cordeiro, who had been quietly standing in the doorway with badge number 214 pinned to his jacket pocket, took off his cap and pressed it against his chest. He did not laugh. He bowed slightly. He had seen 41 men beaten in that room over 14 months, and he had done nothing because the orders from his superiors had been to do nothing. Tonight, watching a small Chinese man bring down the Russian with 2 fingers, Captain Cordeiro felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt the world had not entirely lost its sense of justice. Bruce Lee turned to him and bowed back. Then Bruce spoke for the first time since the count had started. He said quietly in English, "Size is a building, but the architect is a man who knows where the supporting columns are. Find the columns and the building falls." Yuri Volkov began to recover at the end of the 4th minute after he had gone to his knees. The carotid sinus pressure had caused a sudden drop in blood pressure that left him on the edge of consciousness but did not knock him fully out. He blinked. He looked up. He saw Bruce Lee 6 feet away, hands folded, watching him calmly. He pushed himself slowly back to his feet. The room tensed. Carvalho took a step backward. Domingo Reyes ducked behind the bar. Dan Inosanto's hand went back into the camera case, but Yuri Volkov did not charge. He stood up to his full 7 FT and 2 in. He looked down at Bruce. And then Yuri Volkov did something nobody in that room would have predicted, something nobody who knew his record would have believed possible. He bowed, not deeply, just a small inclination of the head, the kind of bow a soldier gives to an officer in a foreign army. Then he spoke in his slow, heavy English. He said, "You are small, but you are not man. You are something else, I do not know what." Bruce Lee bowed back. He said, "I am a student the same as you are, only my teacher was different." Vyulov stood for another moment. Then he walked very slowly to the leather couch and he sat down and he put his enormous hands on his knees and he stared at the floor. He did not look up again that night. Bruce Lee did not collect the $500,000. Carvalho offered him the briefcase. Bruce shook his head. He said the money should be given to the families of the 41 men who had been hurt. Carvalho stared at him. Carvalho said it would take months to find them all. Bruce said, "Then it will take months, but it will be done." Carvalho, shaken by what he had seen, did the work himself. He hired a Portuguese accountant from Lisbon, and he tracked down every single one of those 41 men or their next of kin, and he delivered the money in person, in small canvas envelopes, to homes in Bangkok and Manila and Hamburg, and small towns in Mongolia. The last envelope was delivered in October of 1969 to the widow of a Korean wrestler who had died of internal injuries 3 days after his match with Vyulov. The widow lived in a one-room house outside Busan. She had 3 children. The eldest, a boy of 9, used part of the money to finish school and eventually to become a physician. He is alive today. Bruce Lee walked out of the Lisboa at 26 minutes 9 on the night of January 14, 1969. The total elapsed time inside that room had been 15 minutes. He walked with Dan in Osanto down the Arnita de Amizad in the cool Macau evening. Neither man spoke for the first 3 blocks. Then Dan said, "Bruce, 4 seconds, the whole thing 4 seconds." Bruce did not answer right away. He was looking up at the night sky. Finally, he said, "Dan, the fight was 4 seconds, but the preparation was 28 years. Dan would tell that story much later to his own students. He would tell it the way men tell stories they are not sure they were allowed to see. There is a final part of this story that is not widely known. In 1973, 4 years after that night, Yuri Volkov was found dead in a small apartment in Vladivostok. He had returned to the Soviet Union in 1971 of his own accord. He had requested through channels nobody understood to be reassigned to a quiet position. He had worked as a security guard at a museum for the last 2 years of his life. The cause of death was a heart attack. He was 51 years old. Among his possessions in a wooden box under his bed was a folded piece of rice paper with a single line written on it in English in his own handwriting. The note said, "I do not know what, but I know I was not the strongest man in that room." He had carried that note for 4 years. The Russian who had killed 36 men for the state and beaten 41 men for money and frightened thousands more by simply existing, had spent the last years of his life carrying a piece of paper that reminded him, in his own words, that he was not the strongest man in the room. That is the kind of respect Bruce Lee earned that night. Not the respect of a cheering crowd, the respect of a man who could break a chair with one hand and chose, after meeting Bruce, to carry a piece of paper in his pocket for the rest of his life. Size is a building. The architect is a man who knows where the supporting columns are. Find the columns and the building falls. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember that the smallest man in the room is sometimes the strongest. A fortune of $500,000 in American currency rested on a velvet-covered table inside a private Macau chamber. It was a Tuesday night in January 1969. For the past 14 months, a man named Yuri Volkov had been making a bold claim. No living person could endure 5 seconds against him in combat. He had proven this assertion 41 times. 41 opponents had stepped forward, and 41 times they had been beaten so severely that none could leave the room unaided. The shortest of these encounters was over in just 1.5 seconds, while the longest dragged on for a mere 4.8 seconds. Volkov was a giant, standing 7 feet and 2 inches tall and weighing 391 pounds. In the hushed conversations that took place in Hong Kong, Manila, and Bangkok, he was never referred to as a simple fighter. He was called the Russian, or in even quieter tones, the executioner. His past was as formidable as his physique. Before arriving in the Far East to earn money by breaking bones for sport, Volkov had served 11 years in a secret branch of the KGB, an organization that left no trace in official records. He was the type of operative dispatched to eliminate a target with his bare hands, a method chosen when using a firearm would create too much administrative hassle. Officially, he had 36 confirmed kills to his name, though the actual number of his victims remained a mystery. On the evening of January 14, 1969, at 9 minutes past 9, a man of modest stature entered that back room in Macau. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed just 138 pounds. A calm smile was on his face. His name was Bruce Lee. What was about to unfold in that chamber over the next 90 seconds would become the stuff of legend, though Bruce himself was unaware of the situation he was walking into. He believed he was going to meet a businessman, but he was gravely mistaken. The Hotel Lisboa, which would later become a world-famous casino, was still new in January 1969, having been open for only 9 months. It was a towering white structure on the Avenida de Amizade, its halls filled with the scents of fresh paint, old cigar smoke, and the heavy perfume worn by the croupiers to mask the smell of diesel from the nearby harbor. Macau was still under Portuguese administration, its street signs written in 2 languages and its police officers wearing uniforms of cream. No one asked questions about the activities on the upper floors, where the real fortunes were exchanged. The back room in question was on the 2nd floor, in the southwest corner, behind a door marked only with the number 18. This number, when spoken in Cantonese, sounds similar to phrases meaning certain prosperity, a detail someone had found amusing. The room itself was 42 feet long and 28 feet wide. It was lit by 3 brass chandeliers and a single flickering floor lamp in the corner. The floor was made of teak, and the walls were paneled in dark wood up to shoulder height, with plaster above that was the color of weak tea. There were no windows. A green felt table sat in the center of the room, with 2 leather couches against the east wall and a small bar along the west wall. This bar was tended by a Filipino man named Domingo Reyes, who had been serving drinks to the same private clientele for 19 years. At 61, Domingo had 3 grown daughters in Manila and had witnessed countless acts of violence in his time at that bar: men shot, men stabbed, and at least 1 man who arrived healthy at midnight only to be carried out under a tablecloth before dawn. He had long since stopped being disturbed by such things. However, on this particular night, Domingo Reyes was about to witness something that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The air in the room was thick with the smell of cigar smoke, orange peel, and the faint metallic scent of polished brass that seemed to cling to chandeliers that had hung over the anxieties of many nervous men. From somewhere down the hallway, the scratchy sound of a Frank Sinatra record could be heard, but no one in the back room was paying attention. None of the 11 men present had any idea of the event that was about to transpire. To grasp the significance of what happened that night, one must first understand the nature of Yuri Volkov. He was not merely a big man, he belonged to a different class of human being. Standing at 7 feet 2 inches in his stocking feet, his official weight, taken just 3 weeks prior on a freight scale in Hong Kong, was 391 pounds. A Portuguese physician named Dr. Antonio Brandão, who had long examined Soviet defectors for the colonial government, had measured him. Dr. Brandau's report noted that Volov's chest expanded to 58 inches upon full inhalation. His neck was 23.5 inches around, a measurement wider than the waist of most 10-year-old boys. His hands were abnormal. From the base of the wrist to the tip of his middle finger, they measured 10.75 of an inch. He could hold a regulation American basketball flat against his palm with just 3 fingers, release it, and walk across the room without it falling. His forearms were the size of a normal man's calf. In the margins of his report, Dr. Brandão wrote in pencil, as if afraid to use ink, "There is something biologically wrong with him." Listening through a stethoscope, the doctor found Volov's resting heart rate to be a mere 42 beats per minute, a statistic more common in Olympic distance runners. But Volov was not a runner. He simply walked, and the floor seemed to move beneath him. Despite his weight, he did not lumber, he glided, his movements made graceful by an absolute certainty that nothing would stand in his way. His record was simple and brutal: 41 challenges over 14 months across 6 cities: Manila, Bangkok, Singapore, Saigon, Taipei, and Macau. 41 men had been beaten, and not one fight had lasted more than 5 seconds. The average match time was just 2.7 seconds. The longest bout, against a German wrestler named Klaus Heinemann, lasted 4.8 seconds. Heinemann had survived as long as he did only because he had the presence of mind.